On a list of China's most beloved emperors, you're not likely to see Wu Zetian, China's first and only female emperor. Examining Wu's reign, however, you'd likely consider her a rather impressive figure. Perhaps not the greatest, but certainly on par with the better of the Tang emperors that surrounded her. Nevertheless, if you look at how Wu was traditionally framed in Chinese sources, you wouldn't find much praise, or even indifference. Instead, you'd find her condemned as a scheming adulteress, a traitor, a ruthless murderer, and a baby killer. Is any of this fair, though? Did Wu earn her reputation, and if not, where did it come from? In this video, we discuss the reign of Empress Wu, one of China's most demonized rulers. Wu Zetian's path to the throne began with her serving as a concubine to the Tang Emperor Taizong. As a concubine, Wu was given access to imperial education in order for her to serve as a sort of secretary to the emperor. When Taizong died in 649, he was succeeded by his son, Li Ji, who took on the name Emperor Gaozong. Wu, meanwhile, was sent to a Buddhist monastery to serve out the rest of her days as a nun. This was not to be, as Gaozong soon took on Wu as a consort of his own, after running into her while offering incense for his father at the temple where she'd been sent, and being taken by her beauty. This may not have been their first encounter. It's been alleged that the two had been having an affair even before Taizong's death, which is one of the points used against her by critics. Wu became the favorite consort of Gaozong, and he elevated her to the position of Empress in 655. Gaozong was afflicted with an illness that caused him fits of dizziness, and over the course of his time in power, Wu seems to have taken an increasing role in calling the shots on his behalf. After Gaozong experienced a stroke in 660, Wu effectively became acting emperor. After Gaozong died in 683, he was first replaced by his son who ruled as Emperor Zhongzong. Wu initially served as his regent, but once he showed signs of being more susceptible to the influence of his wife and his wet nurse, for some reason, than to the influence of Wu, she had him deposed and replaced by her younger, more easily controlled son. During this time, when it was obvious to everyone that she was the true power behind the empire, an attempt to depose her was launched. This attempt was bungled, however, and those involved were forced to commit suicide. Over the course of the next 2 years, Wu carried out a number of massacres against the relatives of her late husband, who posed a threat to her hold over the country. At the end of this, she finally decided to give up the charade, and named herself emperor of the new Zhao dynasty. Wu took the title of Huangdi for herself in 690, officially becoming the sole emperor of China, though she'd functionally been ruling for 30 years before that point. Wu's reign was a time of wealth and diplomacy. From murals and artifacts made with precious materials, we can see that Wu hosted foreign visitors from across Asia, and possibly as far as the Mediterranean, and that during her time in power, China was trading with powers from all across Eurasia. More than 20,000 foreigners, mostly traders, lived in Wu's capital of Chang'an, drawn by the demand for Chinese silk in their home countries. The trade of this expensive commodity was facilitated by a series of military outposts Wu had built along the Chinese-controlled parts of the Silk Road. It was no Pax Mongolica, but these outposts certainly did wonders for dealing with the bandits who previously operated along the Silk Road. These Silk Road outposts were far from Wu's only construction projects. Her first was the Daming Palace, which Wu commissioned in 660, while Gaozong was still the official emperor. The Daming Palace was 5 times larger than the Forbidden City, a true spectacle of its time. It was constructed with a magnificent gate, 3 great halls for managing different state matters and hosting diplomatic exchanges, and sprawling gardens stretching throughout the courtyards. Additionally, Wu ordered the storage of rice in hundreds of massive silos to be redistributed in times of need. While this practice was common to other rulers, under Wu, the construction of new silos and advancements in moisture proofing allowed thousands of tons of rice to be safely stored for over a decade at a time, which would prevent droughts from leading to starvation during her reign. Finally, Wu commissioned many construction projects throughout her empire in the name of her religion, Buddhism. After the Dian Ta pagoda was heavily damaged by an earthquake, Wu had it not only rebuilt, but expanded by 5 stories. After this reconstruction, the pagoda would have likely stood around 300 feet tall, making it one of the tallest buildings in the world at the time. Additionally, Wu ordered the construction of Buddhist temples in every single town of her empire. Finally, Wu had her dedication to Buddha set in stone. In the Mogao Caves, a sacred Buddhist site marked by thousands of statues of Buddha carved directly into the cliff faces, Wu commissioned the carving of a 57-foot-tall Buddha statue, which remains the tallest of the site to this day. Artifacts show that during Wu's time in power, the classical Chinese patriarchy was weakened. Women depicted riding horses and wearing men's clothing suggest a loosening of gender roles, and a level of freedom Chinese women would not experience again until the mid-20th century. This can't necessarily be credited to Wu. The Tang Dynasty in general was a time of unprecedented gender equality in China, where women generally had a greater level of social freedom. Even looking back to the time of the dynasty's founder, we can see an example of a princess leading an army on her father's behalf. This equality may have come from the Tang's origins in the north of China, where more egalitarian nomad cultures lived. That makes it hard to say exactly how much of the egalitarianism resulted from Wu's rule, but we can say for certain that she advanced women's rights in some respects. Under Wu, women were allowed to freely marry and divorce, and she encouraged women to participate in the economy. Additionally, she personally employed a number of women in her government, even at one point appointing Shangguan Wan'er, a former concubine like herself, to the position of prime minister. It's noteworthy that, in addition to many of her administrators being women, most were drawn from the lower classes. The inclusion of lower-class people in government was unprecedented in most of Chinese history, and especially in the Tang Dynasty, which has been characterized as a heavily aristocratic society. Wu's inclusion of commoners in tasks that would have normally been reserved for members of the elite classes is no doubt worthy of respect. Okay, so far we've gone over some of the more laudable aspects of Wu Zetian's reign, but nobody is perfect, least of all emperors, and there are some less savory parts to Wu's story. When Wu first became a concubine to Gaozong, she was basically playing third fiddle to his wife, Empress Huang, and his favorite concubine, consort Xiao. As Wu gradually took Xiao's place as Gaozong's favorite, she ended up in a rivalry with both Huang and Xiao. In 654, she and Gaozong had a daughter, not their first child, but seemingly the first during her time as favorite. Not long after she'd been born, however, this daughter died of asphyxiation. We can't say for sure what the actual cause of this was. Ventilation wasn't that good at this time, and the baby might have just inhaled a bit too much carbon monoxide from the furnaces. But Wu accused Empress Wang of strangling the baby out of jealousy, as she hadn't borne Gaozong any children herself. While ultimately nothing concrete came out of this accusation, it was historically popular to theorize that Wu had actually strangled her own baby in the hopes that her rival would take the fall, hence my reference to Wu being called a baby killer at the start of the video. With little evidence in any direction, this is ultimately just rooted in an image of Wu as a ruthless, cold-blooded psychopath. There's some pretty apparent narrative bias in this perspective, which I'll get to soon, but it's not entirely without grounding. Wu certainly was cutthroat when it came to gaining and maintaining power. Around a year after the crib death incident, Wu accused Empress Wang and her mother of being witches. Gaozong had previously believed Wu that Wang had killed their daughter, and only refrained from deposing her after being unable to rally support from his chancellors. Presented with another opportunity, Gaozong ignored the opposition of his chancellors and decisively deposed the Empress, elevating Wu in her place. Wang and, for unclear reasons, consort Xiao as well, were both lowered to the status of commoners and locked up in a small room within the palace. Gaozong visited them in their cell and took pity on them. It was when Gaozong expressed pity and considered freeing them that Wu's ruthlessness became apparent. She ordered both women executed by being beaten with canes and having their hands and feet cut off, and then their corpses stuffed into large wine jars. After this incident, Wu also began eliminating rivals who had opposed her ascension. She accused a number of government chancellors who had disapproved of Wang's demotion of plotting treason, and the few who avoided execution or forced suicide only did so by preemptively dying of natural causes. By 664, Gaozong appears to have become resentful of his wife, who by this point was effectively running things on his behalf and regularly interfering in her husband's decisions. At this point, Wu was accused of getting a Taoist monk to perform witchcraft, which, you'll recall, was something the Chinese imperial court didn't really like. When this was reported to Gaozong, he consulted with one of his chancellors, Shangguan Yi, who advised Gaozong to depose his wife. Gaozong agreed and had Shangguan draft an edict to depose her, but Wu, having learned of this course of events from Gaozong's attendants, showed up to defend herself. Remember how Gaozong came close to freeing Empress Wang and consort Jiu earlier because he felt bad after visiting them in their cell? Well, yeah, he was just as easily moved to shame by Wu in this case, and he blamed Shangguan for the whole idea. Within the next year, Wu convinced an ally to accuse Shangguan, the eunuch who'd accused her of witchcraft, and Li Zhong, the heir apparent to the throne, of conspiring to assassinate Gaozong. Li Zhong was forced to commit suicide, and the other two were executed. On top of that, Shangguan's allies in court were demoted, and his entire family were seized to be servants to the emperor. Among these family members was, of course, his granddaughter, Shangguan Wan'er. Remember her, the former concubine that Wu made prime minister? Yeah, she got her start here as an imperial servant after Wu had her grandpa killed. There are a few other instances of Wu doing some pretty messed up stuff, both to retain power and over petty rivalries. When Gaozong was nearing death, she had his aunt and her husband exiled over unspecified crimes, just because Gaozong liked that aunt, which Wu apparently resented. And on a different occasion, Gaozong and consort Jiao's 2 daughters suddenly died right when they were about to be married, likely poisoned by Wu. But I think we've seen enough examples to make the point. For all the respectable things she did, Wu was still a cold, ruthless individual at times. That being said, though, so were plenty of monarchs. It's not as though political maneuvering and having potential rivals killed were unique to Wu. Many of the actions taken by Wu Zetian during her rule may have been lauded under the reign of a different emperor. Her reforms resulted in a more impartial system of imperial examinations, allowing peasants and commoners to rise to positions in government. And she is credited with great expansions of the Chinese Empire into Central Asia, in addition to great diplomatic effort. Additionally, she commissioned many great construction projects, and her patronage of Buddhism made her popular among the mostly Buddhist lower classes of her empire. Unfortunately, for the sake of her legacy, Wu went against the previous establishment in every way. She struck out against the previous aristocracy, even ordering a number of political rivals executed. Though Wu's time as a Buddhist nun was short, she continued to strongly favor Buddhism over Confucianism and Taoism into the time of her rule. This drew with Buddhist support, even leading them to proclaim her the reincarnation of one of their messiahs. All of this drew the ire of the later Confucian establishment, however, as Wu had chosen to align herself with an alien faith over their native philosophy. Additionally, Wu's gender flew in the face of deeply patriarchal Confucian values, which consigned women to a position subservient to men. In Confucian society, young women were expected to follow their fathers, married women their husbands, and widows their sons. Wu's power over China matched her husband's during his time in power, and exceeded that of her sons, going against these firmly established Confucian gender roles. Wu's ruthlessness would hardly have been out of place for another Chinese ruler, but her gender amplified the ire she drew. The deeply patriarchal nature of Chinese society had little room for female rulers. This, coupled with Wu's rejection of the Confucian establishment, earned her a level of vilification rarely faced by male rulers. At the end of the day, Wu was a great ruler. Ruthless, yes, but so were many others. Her gender, rejection of the old aristocracy, and patronage of Buddhism all led her to be villainized by the future Chinese establishment. And Confucian historians ignored the great parts of her reign in favor of painting her as a villain and a tyrant. For over 1,000 years, this narrative was the norm, but over the past few decades, we finally started to reassess Wu's role in Chinese history, and give her the level of respect she's surely earned.